Okay, so the sermon title then is No More Debar. I want to start by reading in Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1. And so if you have your Bibles with you, you can turn to that, or you can just listen. Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. For this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Now, the longer I live, the more I value that prayer that Paul prayed for us. That we would gain wisdom, understanding, and knowledge of God. The more I get to understand Him, the more I love Him. The more I trust Him. And so it's a good thing. So if you're just young yet, which most of you are compared to me, you've got a lifetime ahead of you of learning wisdom and understanding of who God is. So that's something to look forward to. And I think every Sunday, that's part of why we come to church, isn't it? To gain more insight, to understand who God is, who Jesus is, and what He's done for us. And that just enriches our life. Well, this isn't my sermon. This is just a scripture reading. So he says, I want that to happen so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, and bear fruit in every good work as you grow in the knowledge of God. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from His glorious power. Now, it doesn't say, may you be made strong by trying harder and harder, does it? Doesn't say that. It says, may you be made strong with the strength that comes from His glorious power. And may you be prepared to endure everything with patience while joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you or enabled you to share in the inheritance in the saints of light. Now, who or what has qualified us to share in all the good things of God?
What He did.
He has. It wasn't my working at it. It was what He did. Isn't that good news?
Yep.
Yeah, He has enabled you to share in the inheritance. He has rescued us from the kingdom of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of His beloved Son. He transferred us. He took us from one kingdom and brought us into another kingdom. In His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Now, I want to tell you a story today. And this story comes from the book of 2 Samuel. All right? This story of No More Debar. Well, I need to tell you, it started back when Saul became king of Israel. Most of us probably know that Bible story. Saul was raised up. He was a handsome, tall, good-looking guy. He was a little arrogant, and a little cocky, and a little full of himself, but he became the king of Israel. And it wasn't very long he began to get in trouble because he didn't follow God's ways, God's instructions. And so God told the prophet to go and choose another person who would become king. And do you remember who he chose? David. He chose young David, and he anointed him, and he said, you're the chosen one to become king. Someday, when Saul finishes, then you will become king in his place. So, excuse me, David grew and became more popular among the people, and Saul got jealous. Saul was really upset about that. And in fact, he was so mad that sometimes he tried to kill David because he was afraid David was going to take over his throne. So David worked with him and tried to respect him and so on, but it just didn't go very well. Now, Saul had 4 sons. One of them was named Jonathan. Good name, huh? And Jonathan and David became best of friends. They became BFFs, best friends forever. They were close. They spent time together. They hunted in the woods together. They played together, and they became really good friends. And at one point, Jonathan said, David, my dad's trying to kill you. Or David said, your dad's trying to kill me. And Jonathan said, oh, I don't think he'd do that. But I'll find out how mad he really is at you. And what I'll do, David, is I will make if I find out my dad's trying to kill you, I'll warn you somehow. And he does. David thanks him and says, I want to make a covenant with you, Jonathan. I want to make a covenant with you. I will do everything in my power to bless you and to stand with you And Jonathan said, and will that covenant extend to my children too? David said, yes, it will. Jonathan, I will bless you, I'll bless your family, I'll bless your descendants. When I become king, I'll make sure I take care of you. Wonderful covenant. What happened was, it wasn't very long, and Saul and Jonathan and his other 3 sons were in a battle with the Philistines. And out on the side of that hill, the battle was raging, and swords were clashing, and arrows were flying, and people were screaming and yelling, and men were dying. And Saul is fighting, and he's backing up the hill, and he turns and looks, and there's his son Jonathan dead. He's been killed by the enemy. Saul loved Jonathan so much, his heart broke within him, and he fell to the ground sobbing, my son Jonathan, my son, you're dead. And some of his other men came around him and were standing there. They didn't know what to do. And Saul said, I can't go on living without my son Jonathan. Kill me, just kill me right here. Well, the men said, we can't do that. We can't murder you. Saul was so distraught that he picked up his own sword and fell on it and killed himself, committed suicide there on the side of the mountain. Horrible story, isn't it, so far? Well, Jonathan is dead, Saul is dead, and 2 of his other sons are dead. There's only one left, and that was Mephibosheth. And so he became king because he was the king's son. And he reigned for a short period of time, a couple years, and he wasn't a very good king. And so the whole southern part of the nation, Judah, said to David, we want you to be our king anyway. We'll give allegiance to you. And the northern part, Israel, said to Mephibosheth, you're Saul's son, so we'll stay with you. So they're divided over this. Well, in another battle one day, Mephibosheth was killed. And so now all of the nation, Israel and Judah, said to David, since all of Saul's sons are dead, we will receive you as king now. So David became king of all of Israel. And David reigned well. He was a good king. And he moved the palace from where Saul had been, he moved it to Jerusalem. He captured the city of Jerusalem and built a palace there and made plans to build a temple there. And so David was ruling and reigning. And one day he was thinking about Saul and Jonathan, how much he missed his friend Jonathan. And he remembered, I made a covenant with Jonathan that I would bless him and his family when I became king. But Jonathan's dead. I wonder if he had any children. I better find out. So David called in some of his special forces, and he said, go out through the land and find out if Jonathan had any children and where they might be. I want to bless them. So they went on a reconnaissance mission, spied out the land. They came back and they said, King David, they said, we found that there is a son. Jonathan had a son. His name is Mephibosheth. Try and say that one really fast, huh? Mephibosheth. And David said, wonderful, where is he? And they said, he lives in Debar. David said, Debar? Where is Debar? I've never heard of it. The name Debar actually means nowhere, or a place where nobody communicates. Nobody ever sends word messages. Nobody pays any attention to anybody in Debar. You just don't even bother talking to those people. They're out in the hills and the boonies, and Debar is just a nowhere place. Nobody wants to go to Debar. Nobody's ever taking vacation there. Nobody buys a house there. It's just a little tiny town, and it's poor, and it's just a nowheresville. All right? You ever been to a place like that? You ever gone through a place like that? Hopefully we've never lived. Well, I actually lived in a place that was pretty close to that. It was called Royalton, New Brunswick. And the other day I was actually looking to see if I could find a picture of the old house that we lived in when I was a kid. And I went with Google Maps, and I found this town of Centerville, which was a ways away, and I found the road that goes out to Royalton, and I started doing that, the street view thing, and we went out, and the road that turned up to Royalton, even Google Maps doesn't go there. Okay? It was a Debar. It was kind of a nowhere place, out in the backwoods of nowhere. Well, that's where Mephibosheth has been living. And so David says, how come he's living there? He's a prince. Well, here's the story of what happened. When Saul and Jonathan died, it was tradition in those days that the next king would round up all of the king that died, all of his children, and kill them all, because he didn't want anyone as a rival for the throne. So when Mephibosheth's nanny heard that Jonathan was dead and Saul was dead, her first thought was, oh my goodness, David's going to become king and he's going to kill little Mephibosheth because he's a prince in line for the throne. So she grabs little Mephibosheth, and in her terror and crying and tears, and she runs out of the palace of Saul. Excuse me. She runs down the dirt roads, and she's just got to get away. She's got to protect Mephibosheth. And she's holding little Mephibosheth in her arms. And she's running, and she's tired. And she's in this rocky ground, and she stumbles. And when she stumbles on a side hill, she drops Mephibosheth. And he falls to the ground, and he rolls down the bank and bangs up against the rocks. And she's screaming, oh, Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth, what have I done? What have I done? Are you okay? She hears him crying. She rushes down to him. And when she picks him up, she notices his little feet are all twisted. They're not like they should have been. He broke both ankles when he fell down that hill. And she feels so bad, but she scoops him up, and he's crying because he's in pain, and she's in fear. She runs, and eventually she comes to Debar. And she finds a place where she can stay in Debar. And little Mephibosheth, his ankles didn't heal properly, and they were all twisted and bent. He was crippled in both feet. Little Mephibosheth couldn't run and play with the other kids. Little Mephibosheth, when he tried to walk, all he could kind of do was hobble along and use crutches and sticks to hold himself up. He couldn't play the games with the other kids. He couldn't help out around the house, and he couldn't help do the milking of the cows, or he couldn't do any of that because he was crippled in his feet. He lived in poverty in this little nowheresville town. Wow, what a story, huh? Well, one day, David says, I want to go get Mephibosheth. Now you need to understand that as Mephibosheth grew up, the other kids made fun of him. Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth, can't walk and play. Suppose that hurt? Yeah. Mephibosheth, show us your funny feet, Mephibosheth. Ah. Yeah. And even the adults somebody would say, I think Mephibosheth is coming. Oh, that cripple? Just over and over. His wounds in his feet became wounds in his heart, because people said those things about him. So David says, go and get him. So David's men get on their horses, and they ride out to Debar. And they finally found it, and they ride into the little tiny village, and they say, where does Mephibosheth live? And somebody says, I think he's down at Machir's house. So down they went, and they find Mephibosheth. He's now a young man. And he sees those soldiers of King David. He sees the big flag they're carrying with David's crest on it. And he thinks, my life is over. David's found me, he's going to kill me. My miserable life is going to amount to nothing. And they said, Mephibosheth, come with us. King David has sent us to take you to the palace. So they put him on a donkey, and they ride slowly down through the dust, and they eventually come to Jerusalem, great city of David. And they go up to the palace where David lives. And they help Mephibosheth off the donkey, and he hobbles in, and he sees King David. And he falls on his face and pays honor to David, because he thinks, maybe if I beg for mercy, maybe this man will spare my life. He grovels before David, and David spoke his name. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. Stand up. Get up. You know what I'm going to do? And Mephibosheth thinks, here it comes, death sentence. And David says, all the lands that belong to your dad and your grandfather, I'm going to give all those lands back to you. Wow. And I'm going to get all the men that were servants to your dad and your grandfather, and they're going to come and they're going to work all the land for you. And bring in all the crops and sell them for you and keep all the books and do all the work so that you will have plenty to live on. But they'll do all the work for you. And Mephibosheth falls again on the palace floor and he says, King David, why would you do this for me? I'm just a dog. I'm a dead dog. Dogs in that culture were seen as being unclean and just, it was the lowest thing you could say if you called someone a dog. And David said, Mephibosheth, look up at me. You're not a dead dog. You are Prince Mephibosheth. You are going to live in my palace now. And I'm going to have you sit at my table. You're going to sit at my table. You're going to eat at the king's table with the king's sons and daughters. Wow. Can't you imagine the look on Mephibosheth's face? He can't believe what he's hearing. David said, Mephibosheth, come, live here with me. No more Debar. Now Mephibosheth has a choice. Mephibosheth could say, no thank you. I'm going to go back and live in Debar, where there's hardly enough to eat and everybody makes fun of me. Where I'm a broken, where life isn't very exciting. Or he might have said, King David, I appreciate your offer. I'll work hard for you. I'll do whatever I can around the palace. I'll write poems about you. And Dave, you don't need to do anything. Because I have a covenant with your dad. Hello? Why are you doing all this? Because there's a covenant. Has nothing to do with Mephibosheth. Mm-hmm. It was a covenant that David made with his dad, Jonathan, right? Mm-hmm. Got that? Mephibosheth makes the right choice and he says, all right, I'll come live here. And for the rest of his days, Mephibosheth ate at the king's table. The best foods in the land. Servants waiting on them. Sitting at the king's table with the king's sons and daughters. Now, if you just came in and looked, you would see the king's sons and daughters and Mephibosheth, and you wouldn't know there's anything wrong with Mephibosheth because his feet are under the king's table. Well, this is good, folks. His feet are under the king's table. He's still lame in both feet. But if you walked in, you'd never know it. Hello? Because of what King David did. That's my story. Now here's the point of my story. This is a good story. Because this story is our story. Mm-hmm. And David's story is Jesus' story. The Old Testament's always showing us Jesus. And in this instance, King David is showing us Jesus. Let me explain to you. The reality is, folks, every one of us here today, every one of us has been dropped. Let that sink in a minute. At some point in our life, somebody dropped you and me. And it damaged us. It hurt us. It might have been a parent who never showed you love. It might have been a school teacher that called you stupid. It might have been some kids in the neighborhood that were cruel to you. It might have been something that somebody did to you that was awful. Every one of us have been dropped by somebody. Often it wasn't intentional. Mephibosheth's nanny didn't mean to hurt him. She was doing what she thought was best. but because of what she was doing, he ended up crippled for life. There's some of us who have been like that. Some of us who had things happen to us, and people meant them well, but just the way they did things or the way things happened, it hurt us deeply, deeply. We are all crippled in some areas of our lives. All of us, I think in the shack, the guy, he calls it the great sadness. All of us somewhere deep down inside have a great sadness. There's a part of us, and sometimes, you see, I think Mephibosheth probably always wore long robes so that people wouldn't see his bent feet. He probably sat and he tucked his feet kind of in under him so that nobody would know. And don't we do the same thing? Those parts of us that are wounded and broken, we try to hide it from other people. We try to hide it from other people. Because like Mephibosheth, we probably feel shame about our brokenness. It wasn't Mephibosheth's fault. But I'm sure that every time he went outdoors and the other kids came by, he felt ashamed of his broken feet. The other thing I notice about this story is we often become known for our brokenness, not who we really are. In Debar, Mephibosheth was known as the cripple. The other kids said, "Are you going to play with that weirdo? He's strange. His feet are all funny." Nobody went like, "He is such an amazing writer." Or he draws pictures of, they all just knew him. He's the one with the broken feet. And sometimes for you and I, we become labeled for our brokenness. People say things maybe like this about us. "Oh, well, you can't trust her. She lies all the time." That's her brokenness. Or maybe they say, "Oh, well, I can't stand him. He's so arrogant, thinks he's better than everybody else the way he acts." Or, "Oh, she tries so hard to impress everybody, nobody's impressed." Or, "That guy, he uses people to get what he wants." Or, "That person, she's so angry all the time. She's just such a negative person." Or, "Well, he's just a womanizer. You can't trust him around women." What they're doing is they're labeling us by our brokenness. They don't see who we really are. Wow. And we struggle to get by. We live diminished lives. Prince Mephibosheth, who should have been living in a palace with all the privileges of royalty, is living in Debar, half starving, in pain every day, living a diminished life. And those things that have happened to us diminish our ability to enjoy life too. When Mephibosheth came before King David, remember he bowed down and said, "I'm just a dog. I'm nobody. I'm a nothing. You don't want to bother with me. I don't count." How often you and I are ashamed to get into God's presence because we know what we're like down inside. And sometimes when we make mistakes or do a sin, we just don't even want to pray or read the Bible because we don't want to be in his presence because we're ashamed. Remember Adam and Eve? What did it say after they ate the tree? They hid themselves because they were ashamed and afraid. Mephibosheth was hidden away in Debar because he was ashamed and afraid. He didn't want the king to know. But look, I love this. When King David looked at Mephibosheth, he didn't see a crippled, broken man. He saw the son of his best friend. Oh, this is good. When Jesus looks at you and me, he doesn't see us in our brokenness. He sees us as one of his children, created to be children of God. I love that about David. I love that about Jesus, don't you? The reason David called Mephibosheth in was not to punish him or make fun of him or give him a lecture. The reason David called Mephibosheth in was to restore to him all of those lands and to give him a place in the king's palace. The reason Jesus calls you and me is to restore us. We sang about it. He restores my soul. Oh, God's good at that.
Mm.
He restores my soul. You anoint me with oil. You prepare a table before me. You see that? You see how Psalm 23 leads us right into the presence of God? It leads us right into the palace. And I will dwell, where? In the house of the Lord. I'll eat at the king's table forever. Oh, isn't that awesome? Psalm 23. 2 Samuel 9, the story of Mephibosheth. Colossians, he's taken us out of the kingdom of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. He's redeemed us, set us free, set us at liberty, he's restored us. Oh, man, that's good. You will live in the palace as a prince. What David is saying is, when you were born to be a prince. Right? He was Jonathan's son. What Jesus says to you and me is, you weren't born to be a nobody. Oh, come on, folks, this is good. A little amen or something we just have to allow. You weren't born to be a nobody. You were born to be a son or daughter of the King.
Mm-hmm.
That's who you were created to be.
Yep.
That's who Jesus wants to restore you to. Oh, this is so good. What he's saying to Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth, you see yourself as a dog. You see yourself as a cripple. I'm calling you a prince. Now, Mephibosheth, this is good. You can choose to let go of your negative self-image and trust that you're who I say you are. Or you can hang on to your old negative self-image. Well, folks, that's what Jesus has done for you and me.
Yeah.
Jesus, because of the cross, looks at each one of us and goes, I know what you think about yourself. I know you think you're not good enough, you're not worthy. I know you think you don't pray enough, or love enough, or give enough, or read the Bible enough. I know you think you don't measure up. I know you think you're a failure. That's not who you are. Mm-hmm. Let go of that negative image that somebody else put on you. You see, Mephibosheth, the nurse dropped him. His feet are crippled, not because he did something bad, but because something happened to him. Let go of that. That's not who you are. Mm-hmm. You've been living out there in Debar, a nothing and a nobody, but that's not who you are. You can let go of that. Mm-mm. And embrace who I created you to be, who you really are. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. And it says Mephibosheth ate at the king's table. I love that picture. Now, the king's table, we've got a little table set up here today. It's not all that fancy. I wish we had gold and silver stuff on it and candlesticks and chandeliers. And the king's table would have been pretty fancy, don't you think? With linens and tapestries and elaborate candle holders and the best bowls and silver. And it would have been amazing. It was like if you went in there, you'd go like, wow, this king lives gloriously. Huh? You ever been to a place like that, visited a place like that, where a table or something was set and you just went like, wow, that's impressive, that's amazing. Mephibosheth put his feet under David's glory. Mm. Oh, this is good, people. This is jump out and run around the church news. Jesus lets you and I put our brokenness under his table and he covers it with his glory. Mm-hmm. Oh. Mm. When you walk in, all you see is Prince Mephibosheth with his crown and his royal robes sitting at the glorious king's table. That's how heaven sees you and me. Mm-hmm. We are robed with righteousness. Mm. Children of the Most High God, sitting at the glorious table of the King. That he's covered our brokenness with his glory. Amen. I love that picture. Amen. Oh, man. So what David is saying, Mephibosheth, no more Debar. Mm. Don't go back to that. Don't buy into what people have called you. Don't buy into the shame you felt. Don't go back and live like that. Live. Remember the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8? And she said, I'm not condemning you. Go and sin no more. What Jesus was saying to her is, don't go back to Debar. Right. Don't go back living like that. Everybody's called you an adulteress and a harlot. Don't buy that. Go and live a new way. Live like who you really are, a child of the King. Wow. Now, this is important too. We're sitting at the King's table. Our broken feet are under the glory, under the covering. We know they're still there. But here's the good news. When I first read that story years and years ago, it ends, the last verse. Well, let me read it to you. The last verse of this story in chapter 9 says, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem. He didn't go to Debar. He's now living in the king's city. For he always ate at the king's table. Now he was lame in both feet. And when I read that, I went, what? That's not how it's supposed to end. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to end with his feet being healed. And for a long time I pondered that, like, what's with the fact that his feet are still broken? Oh yeah. You and I still live, we know we're broken. We still know, we know that. It's still there. But we're living in the king's palace. With the king's table, our brokenness is covered by his glory. Mm. That means my life is no longer diminished by my brokenness. Yeah. Oh, come on, church. This is one of my favorite stuff. Your brokenness does not diminish your life.
Amen.
Because of what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. Because of what Jesus did. You can put that brokenness under his glory and live like you were created to be. Oh, you'll still be aware my feet hurt under this table. But I'm living an abundant life to the full now, right? Okay, well, we're going to come to the table today. We're going to do communion. Now don't panic, we're not going to drink out of this cup. If some of you were thinking, oh my goodness, we're all going to drink out of a common cup. No, we're not going to do that today. What we're going to do is take a piece of bread and just dip it in the cup a little bit, get a little bit. That's how we're going to do communion. I asked Pastor Ian if I could do this, so he said it was okay, so we're going to do this. Because I really believe that communion is the perfect illustration of this story we've just immersed in. Huh? We, broken people, live diminished lives. Putting ourselves down. I'm just of this. I'm just of this. I'm no good at that. I've never done this. I can't. We live like that. And Jesus came from heaven to Debar, to earth, where we were, and said, I'm looking for you. And he calls us by name, and he restores to us abundant life, and he says, come, eat at my table, put your feet under here, and let me cover you with my glory. Huh? Let me restore to you abundant life. Now, why did Mephibosheth get all those blessings? Was it because he worked hard at it? Mm-mm. No. Was it because he was a really good boy? Not that we know of. Hello? Was it because he was good looking? It was because his father made a covenant with David. Come on. Oh, people, get this. The reason you and I have all the blessings of God, forgiveness, life everlasting, life to the full, mercy, grace, compassion, inclusion, adoption, is not because we're good looking or we've done so much or we've tried so hard. It's because Jesus made a covenant with Father. Mm. On the night he was betrayed, Jesus took the bread and he broke it. He tore it apart. And he gave it to them and he said, this is the bread. This bread is my body. And he took the cup and he blessed it and he said, this is my blood poured out in the new covenant. It's the new covenant. Mm. So every time Mephibosheth came to the table, he put his feet under that beautiful table and the food was served to him. He's reminded, the king loves me. Mm. The king has made all this possible. Every time you and I excuse me, come to the table of the Lord and take the bread and the cup, we are going, the King made this possible. Jesus made this all possible. He is not repulsed at my brokenness. He covers it with his glory. He brings me into his house. He restores my life to me. So that's what we're going to do today as we come. We're coming to this table. And what I would encourage you to do is just take a piece of bread. I don't know if you've done it this way before or not, but just take a piece of bread and just dip just the edge of it and just wait a second until it kind of finishes dripping. Then you won't get grape juice on yourself. Okay? And then turn it up like that so that the juicy part's on the top. And then you can partake of it. Okay? So in a minute, I'm going to invite you to come to the King's table and receive what Jesus has done for you. This meal is a reminder. I've been invited to the King's palace. I'm covered by his glory. He loves me in my brokenness. Oh, man, that's good. Father,